irtati edo. Thank you for coming here. You know, I rehearsed that 12 times, and then I just let my mind wander for a moment and made a mistake. That's how it goes. My name is J.B. Rainsberger. Let's see how well does the caption spell. Almost. E. E instead of U next time. Here's where you can find me. And of course, you can find me here during a conference for the next couple of days. My topic today is the selfish team player. So here's a quick overview, some of the things that we're going to, that I'm going to talk about. And I really do hope this time, as I do every time, to leave more than enough time for questions. And I have a nice timer here to remind me how much time I'm wasting by talking about the timer. So let's go on. Now, why should we care about this at all? And the short version is that I've spent the last 5 years working a lot one-on-one and in small groups with a particular kind of software development professional, notably people who are becoming emerging technical leaders. Either they already have a leadership position inside their company, or they are just a programmer who is sort of spreading their wings and trying to fly for the first time. And this involves now trying to ethically influence the behavior of other people. Maybe they want to improve what's going on around them. And so they struggle with questions such as these. And probably one of the most common questions that I get, or one of the most common discussions that we have, is this fourth one: I hate my job, what should I do? Should I quit software development entirely? And especially as the big topic of today, LLMs and agents is becoming more and more a part of our work, this question's coming up more and more. And so what I've done is compiled a handful of tools that I use in trying to guide these discussions and answer questions. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. Now, I chose the term selfish team player in part because it sounds provocative. It sounds wrong, even. It sounds contradictory, and that's called marketing, right? That's advertising, where you want to try to make something memorable and counterintuitive. So let me talk a little bit more about what do I mean by the selfish team player. So first, selfish gets a bad rap. Okay, fine. Selfish can be good, neutral, or bad. It depends on exactly what you do with it. I'm interested in more of something like rationally self-interested. No, I'm not an Ayn Rand fan. I just happen to find this one phrase actually quite helpful. And then when you think of team player, you might be thinking about something like, as I say, the enterprise caliber yes person, the emblematic of the can-do spirit. Yes, boss, absolutely, right away, no problem, we'll get it done for you. Now, selfish team player is really maybe more like rationally self-interested person who genuinely wants to play on a team. Now, where did this come from? So my wife and I were sitting in a restaurant. This was during the period when she was traveling with me to clients, which certainly makes working away from home a lot more pleasant. And I happened to read about this thing that Stephen Covey said that he did, where he worked with his family to come up with a family mission statement. It sounds like a very Stephen Covey thing to do. It sounds like one of those obnoxious consultant things to do. And I thought, well, usually these obnoxious consultant things have some grounding in reality. This will either be a really silly exercise or it'll be informative and insightful, and at least it will make dinner go a little bit more quickly. So we sat down and we discussed what would our family mission statement be. And let me be clear that when I say family, I mean just Sarah and I, because we have no children. So it made it a lot easier to agree. And I don't remember any of the rough drafts. I only remember where we ended up. And where we ended up is this: that our mission was to help ourselves so that we could help others. And some of the ways in which we had been able to help others in the past was, for example, Sarah was a secondary school tutor in her younger years, and I believe 2, maybe 3, I've lost count, of her former students needed to live with us for a while, for example, while they were making the transition from living with their parents to living on their own, or in one case where one of her former students was moving to where we lived to go to school, but he couldn't find a place to live yet, so he needed to live with us for a few months before he could find a place to live for the school year. It's wonderful to be able to do these things for other people, but if you don't take care of yourself first, you might get into trouble. And so, how seriously we took this mission? Well, for example, we decided that there was no way that we could continue to live in in an expensive city like Toronto and be able to help other people. We would be too busy figuring out how to work stressful, painful, annoying jobs just to pay for the house. And so we figured out that in order to be able to help others, we would need to be able to help ourselves by leaving Toronto for a much less expensive life. And in fact, we moved to the middle of nowhere in central Canada and slashed our living expenses by 75%. You could imagine that that opened up many new possibilities for us. Around the same time, I started to notice that I was having a serious problem with burnout and the beginnings of severe depression. And so I had to become severely protective of my free time, to the point where it felt like I spent an entire 2 years continuously apologizing to people for backing out of commitments I'd made because I simply didn't have enough energy to be able to do these things. And this was really the period where I confronted for the very first time in my life the very real constraints I had on my actual capacity to do work. Now, we've seen already on one slide earlier today that if you love what you're doing, it's not work. I think that's nonsense. I think that I make the distinction instead between work and job. Work is the stuff that we do. Job is a way of exchanging work for money. And so when I talk about how seriously we took this mission, what I really want to emphasize here is the changes that we were really willing to make in our lives to help ourselves so that we could then put ourselves in a much greater position to help other people. And doing these things helped us together and me on my own, to have more time, more money, and more energy with which to be able to serve others. So when I talk about selfish, I don't mean altruistic. I don't mean altruistic as selfless and hedonistic as selfish. It's not quite those levels of extremes. What I mean is recognizing that you're a human, your energy is your bottleneck. You can't generate more energy on your own without making real changes in your lives. There are constraints that you are stuck with. Some of it is genetic lottery, some of it is cultural conditioning, some of it is the way you've been spending your life over the last 5 to 25 years. And recognizing your constraints in a way that where you refuse to go beyond your constraints, to do more than you can, because you think that that will make other people love you. Let's go back before I get here. I am a professional 5-pin bowler. 5-pin bowling is, let's just say, Canadian bowling. You wouldn't think that a professional bowler could exist in Canada, but it does. I'm one of them. And in my goal to become an elite athlete in a sport, one of the things that I, of course, am very concerned about is the score. The score of my bowling games is how I determine whether I win competitions or not. I haven't won any yet. And I went through a period early in my career when I was traveling to tournaments where I really wanted a sense of belonging within the community of bowlers. I didn't want to just be the novelty who could afford to spend all this money to travel to a bunch of tournaments that he had no chance of winning. I wanted to be taken seriously and respected as a competitor. And what that led to was a feeling of a lack of confidence, a lack of belief in myself. And it took a very long time for me to get to the bottom of what was actually going on inside me. And one of the first insights that I was led to, and it's going to sound obvious when I say it, is that performing less well at a tournament doesn't make them love me less. Again, when I say it like that, it sounds kind of obvious, but if you ask any athlete, one of the things that drives athletes in any sport is a severe insecurity that comes from the fact that, or from the perception, not fact, from the perception that if I don't perform well, my parents aren't going to love me, my teammates aren't going to love me, my opponents aren't going to respect me, the fans are going to hate me. This is what drives a surprising number of professional athletes in any sport. Now, that insight is not really all that insightful, but the next one really surprised me. Because then I also realized that performing better at these tournaments didn't make them love me more. That really was a big change for me. When I realized that People will love me for me and not for my performance. They won't hate me because I'm bad, and they won't love me because I'm good. And yet, as software professionals, or indeed as people who are performing in any business, we have this strange idea in our head that if we can commit to more and deliver more and perform better, then they will love us more. Maybe we don't say it that way, but if you think about the stress, the over-responsibility, the pain and suffering that you feel because of how you feel about your job, that feeling that you hate your job because you're always behind, because you're always in trouble, because you're always disappointing people, because you always have to say you'll do it and then not be able to deliver. That what lies at the core of all that is this notion that if only I could perform better, they will love me more. They will accept me more. I will be more a part of this group. And it took me a long time to come to the realization that that's just not true. So what are some of the tools involved in being reasonably selfish? Well, one of them is David Allen's Getting Things Done. A lot of people think this is a book about building checklists and next actions and projects and checking things off lists, and yes, it starts there. But what really happens when you put the ideas of getting things done into practice is that eventually you are forced to confront the limits of your capacity to do work. You understand, maybe for the first time in your life, in black and white, by looking at lists and seeing that the lists are getting longer, not shorter, even though you feel like you're working all the time, that you have not been realistic about your capacity to do work, and you have to, out of self-defense, commit to less, say yes to less. You have no choice. And this is where Jerry Weinberg's yes-no medallion, which I think might have come from the work of Virginia Satir, becomes helpful. The core idea here is that if you are never willing to say no, then saying yes becomes meaningless. I think I experienced this most starkly during my one work trip where I spent a month in Bangalore, India, and it was very common culture there. When you asked an Indian person, say a hotel staff, to do something, they would immediately say yes, even if they know that there's no chance it will happen. And not only do they say yes, knowing that there's no chance it will happen, but they expect you to also know that there is no chance it will happen. For someone from Canada, that was kind of a rude surprise the first time they said, yes, absolutely, sir, and then nothing happened. If you never say no, then yes is meaningless. And another is Slack, the good one, not the chat, but the book by Tom DeMarco, which essentially is a companion to, say, Ellie Goldratt's The Goal, in which they focus on making use of the bottlenecks in your work and life to find spare time in the couch cushions. That bottlenecks are not just about, well, if you don't figure out how to improve throughput at this part of the system, then nothing matters. But the nice thing about bottlenecks is that if you're waiting for something at a bottleneck and there's nothing you can do but wait, then suddenly you have excess time that you can use to do whatever you want. And that a lot of increasing your capacity to do work comes down to understanding where the bottlenecks are and taking advantage of the waiting time to then find extra time that you can use to do the other things you might need to do. And then, of course, because it's important to have a reference to something that sounds very official and that has a long history so that you can give it to executives and they won't laugh at you, of course, you can always give them a copy of Ellie Goldratt's The Goal, which formalizes this theory of constraints thinking. So that's the selfish part. Being selfish involved, for me at least, understanding for the first time and confronting the limits of my ability to do work, how much work I could actually do, and then stopping trying to do more. But instead, using techniques like getting things done and bottleneck theory to help me figure out how to make the best use of the time that I had available. Now, what about team? I don't like to throw the word team around anymore. I was infected by Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and now I make a very clear distinction between groups and teams. And a group is just that, a group of people. A bunch of people who happen to be working in the same code base, a bunch of people who happen to be working on the same project. But what makes a team is complex. I mean complex in the Cynefin sense. Now, there are some pictures emerging about what it takes for a group to become a team, and there are various models. I'll list a few in a moment. But one thing that we have in common here is that we really don't actually know how to build teams. Anybody who thinks they've unlocked the secret to building a team is perhaps oversimplifying or has found a pattern that happens to work in certain contexts some of the time. The nature of complexity and what makes it different from merely being complicated is that the links between cause and effect are at best illusions. But there are some tools that we can use to help us understand how to become a team. This wonderful book, maybe not as wonderful for Europeans because most of the examples in here come from baseball, which is clearly a North American sport, although it's becoming more international. This book, Intangibles, talks about two key signs that your group is becoming a team. And that is when they have a shared goal and they articulate that shared goal to each other. It's clear and they actually talk about it. And second, when they do things for each other instead of just for themselves. I know that sounds like that contradicts with the whole selfish thing, but remember, selfish has to do with getting your affairs in order so that you have the time and money and energy to give to others. And then when you start volunteering to do things for other people and not just for yourself, that's when you know you're turning from a group into a team. It doesn't really tell you how to get there. The neat thing about this book is that there's a whole bunch of different ways to get there, but those are the two signposts that seem to be in common. We also have the classic 5 dysfunctions of a team. The first dysfunction is a lack of trust, and so that is also the foundation for all the rest. You can read that book to get more into the full model of what it takes to help a group become a team. One of the first things that you try to do is to build trust. And that's not trust like I can predict what Mario is going to do when he does something. It's trust like I'm willing to be vulnerable with Mario and I feel safe. I can do this and not worry that he's going to shove a knife in my belly. That is what Patrick Lencioni means by trust. There's also the Drexler-Sibbett model, which I admit I don't know, but a bunch of my colleagues have mentioned it to me. They seem to love it, and so it seems to be a good complement to the 5 dysfunctions of a team model. And if you like to read, we're in Greece, I usually use the joke that says that every mathematician at some point has to go and read Euclid. Well, if you want to read the Euclid of software development, that's Jerry Weinberg, so you could go back and read The Psychology of Computer Programming, which is from 1972, going by memory. And except for the fact that there are a few code samples in PL1, that book could have been written today. All right, maybe it talks a little bit about what went weird when we started having monitors instead of waiting for punch card operators to give us jobs back, but that's really the same thing as the difference between software development before LLMs and software development after it. So what is a team player? A team player is simply someone who has the intention of cultivating a team. That's it. So now, selfish has to do with being rationally self-interested and having an honest understanding of your capacity to do work so that you stop overcommitting and trying to do more than you can. A team is a group of people who at least have shared goals that they actually talk about in public, and when they do things, they do them for each other instead of just for themselves. And so a team player is somebody who wants to cultivate a team. And therefore, the selfish team player is a leader who puts themselves, puts themselves first, who initially focuses on themselves and gets their affairs in order, gets their work in order, gets their habits in order, so that they can then use their additional capacity, their spare time, money, and energy, and volunteer to give that to other people so that they can cultivate a team around them. So here are a bunch of things that are true about selfish team players. The selfish team player remembers that a consultant advises people with their consent. That's Jerry Weinberg's definition of consulting. And therefore, they don't inflict help on people. A selfish team player recognizes that, unfortunately, the corporate or enterprise realities are that sometimes we have to do silly things, we have to play the game, because in the end, we all need to feed our families. And we want to help each other feed their families. And this is part of helping myself so that I can help others. A selfish team player does not put the group above themselves. This is not about being a yes man. This is not about being a servant. This is about balancing your own interests with the interests of the people around you and using the extra time, money, and energy, the extra resources that you build to give that to other people to cultivate a team around you, because that builds a greater experience for everyone. A selfish team player strategically conserves time, energy, and money so they can give these things with the pure joy of a child, which is ripped directly out of Marshall Rosenberg and nonviolent communication. Okay, sounds great. Let's get started. So, the good news is programming is relatively easy, and now we've just been through a demonstration on stage that shows that programming is even easier than this. So this is about a year to 18 months out of date, but here is an example of how we managed to master programming. So first we use the theory of constraints to figure out where the bottlenecks are in our software development systems, and then when we notice that we are waiting for things, we suddenly have slack time, and we can use that slack time for personal improvement. And so then we actually, improve. The funny thing is, some of the things in this list are now going to be the things that we're going to have to teach the LLMs to do so that they behave in a way that we can actually understand and manage. So although some of these ideas will seem quaint by today's standards, I think they're still going to be helpful. We can use ideas from getting things done in monotasking to manage open loops. That's that, I'm stuck waiting for somebody to give me an answer so that I can continue working. No relevance to LLMs at all there. But to manage open loops, to improve concentration, to improve focus, and to allow us to bring more attention to emergent and unplanned tasks so that we can actually begin planning for them. And these are things like Kanban method or the so-called naked planning, where we reserve one spot in our plan for, oops, something came up and we have to drop everything and get to it. Getting things done in monotasking are a couple of techniques, ideas that are helpful for these things, that allow us to deal with the complexities of modern work without draining our brains unnecessarily. Monotasking helps us train ourselves to concentrate on one task at a time, balancing that with the responsiveness of being able to, as I said, respond to other people's requests as we go. And getting things done, one of the things inside there is managing open loops, building tips and tricks that we can use to help us manage those long-running conversations with other people where we're waiting on them or they're waiting on us, without constantly carrying these ideas or these things around in our heads that I remember I have to email them by 3 o'clock and I have to make sure that I get this at the end of the day and blah, blah, blah. But being able to write all these things down, having habits where we're not trying to carry all this stuff in our head. And so we iterate through this, right? Figure out where the bottlenecks are, use the ideas from, say, extreme programming or from some other continuous improvement philosophies that you like, and then using the ideas from getting things done in monotasking to be able to execute our plan effectively. And by doing this, we build up more and more excess time. We recover some of the time that we were wasting in the past. And this is where I think a lot of people make the mistake. They immediately want to take this excess time and use it to do more work. That's what your bosses are going to expect you to do. That's what the shareholders are expecting you to do. And they all need to sit down and relax. Because what you almost certainly have been doing up until the point that you arrived in this hall today is trying to do too much. Trying to do too much every day for too long to the point where you are already feeling signs of burnout and maybe even severe depression. Most people, when they finally decide that they're going to put a stop to that, need to start building up excess time and then use some of that time to rest and recover. This is the part that most people, especially young men, get wrong. You need to rest and recover. If you don't, I can tell you for sure that you will do it 5 years from now in a hospital. Learn from my mistakes. After you've rested and recovered, then You can iterate further to build up excess energy because now all of a sudden you're getting things done, and instead of seeing the backlog getting longer and longer, the backlog's actually getting shorter. You're getting accustomed to the idea of saying no, and that makes you feel better because it makes you feel more in control of what you're trying to do. And now you're not just building up excess time, which you can use to do more things, but you're building up excess energy, which will make you want to do more things, which will make you focus better on the things that you're doing. And when you focus better on the things that you're doing, you'll finish them sooner because you'll make fewer mistakes. Now you start to have the opportunity, because you have rested and recovered, to start reinvesting your new excess time and energy, not only in yourself, but also in other people. And you keep doing this until your employer fires you for making them look bad. And then you start again at the next company. And you just keep doing that until you are financially independent or dead, whichever comes first. So if that's the easy part, what's the hard part? The hard part is when we try to do all the things on the previous slide with other people. Software development would be great if we could just get rid of all the computers and all the people. Now, it looks like with AI, we're trying to get rid of all the people. I'm wondering what it's going to take to get rid of all the computers. The problem with other people is that they have opinions, and they have needs, and they have preferences. And they can't tell their opinions from their needs, from their preferences. They try to have arguments about objective truths when really what's lying behind those arguments is simply, I would rather do it this way and I don't like doing it that way. But you can't admit that in a meeting. You have to make it sound like your idea is better than theirs. They're conditioned not to talk about their emotions. I want to be clear that when I say that they have these things and they don't distinguish, I'm not blaming them. No shade, just facts. This is how most humans are most of the time. Partly because they have been conditioned not to talk about their emotions in public, not even to talk about their emotions in private, and probably even not to talk about their emotions internally. This is something that I'm glad is starting to change over the last 10 to 20 years in, let's say, Western society more generally. We've come a long way, and there's a long way to go. They're conditioned to believe that vulnerability and openness are weaknesses, whereas it turns out that they are, in fact, strengths. They are part of the solution, not part of the problem. And unfortunately, sociopaths tend to be rewarded by current reward structures inside enterprises. You could watch a film such as The Corporation or read any book about the rise of sociopaths in corporate life if you want a clearer picture than this. If you don't believe it, well, I don't know what to tell you. All you have to do is turn on the news and you can see examples of it every single day. So people are annoying, but hey, wait, I'm annoying too. One of the really nice things about this is that I'm not blaming others for being human. I'm recognizing the humanity in all of us. And recognizing that I'm prone to these things too. And one of the ways that I can help myself is to be honest about these things inside myself and to handle them or to deal with them inside myself before I expect others to do the same. So now, I affectionately talk about playing well with others. This is something that I have been training myself to do over the past 20 years. I say training myself not because I know everything and am directing myself, but more like I have been seeking out over the last 20 years wisdom that I can apply to my life that helps me play better with other people. And these are the stages that I went through. So first it was, and this was what it was like when I was trying to become a technical leader within my first job at IBM in Toronto 25 years ago. Why won't they listen to me? What's wrong with them? I was wandering up and down the halls trying to understand why it was that I had all these great ideas and nobody wanted to listen to me. Until one of my colleagues, who was about 10 years older than me, pulled an annual report off his shelf, showed me a number that said 0.8%, said that's everyone in this building, which had 2,000 people in it. We are 0.8% of IBM Canada's revenue. Now do you understand why nobody cares about what you're trying to say? So I went through this period of why won't they listen to me, what's wrong with them, and then gradually I started to understand that part of the problem was that I did not understand how to convey messages to people in a way that they were willing to hear. The subtitle of the book Secrets of Consulting is something like the art of giving advice. So then I moved into stage 2 where the question was, why won't they listen to me? What's wrong with me? I recognized now that I needed to be selfish. I needed to do something, look inward, and try to figure out what was going poorly about the way that I was interacting with people so that I could then figure out how to trick them into listening to me. And then eventually I started to figure out that, well, maybe what's better is, look, I'll just give them the answers, and they'll listen to me or they won't, and I don't mind. And then eventually I started to understand that instead of giving them answers, maybe I'll start asking them questions, and they'll work with me or they won't. So these are the stages I think that you might go through as you go on your leadership journey, as you try to learn how to ethically influence people. And the good news is there's no rush. It took me at least 10, maybe 12 years to get from stage 1 to stage 2. So don't be surprised if it seems to be taking you a long time too. And some of the tools that are helpful here are the Satir interaction model. So this is the work of Virginia Satir. This is a starting point for understanding how to debug human interactions. When you find yourself in a conflict and you don't know what happened, and now you're in the corner, you've poured yourself something to drink, you're sitting down, you're crying or you're yelling, maybe both, and you're wondering just what on earth happened, then you play the conversation back in your head. The Satir interaction model gives you a way of thinking about what actually happened here, where were the problems, what can I try differently next time? There's also something called powerful questions. This is, trademark, whatever. There are lists of questions that you can learn to ask, which are especially helpful in many situations. One of the ones that's related to the Satir interaction model, the powerful question I use frequently is when I'm puzzled by the way somebody's behaving, after I get over my initial reaction, I ask myself, what would have to be true for me to behave like that? Like, it's one thing to be puzzled by the way they're reacting in that moment, but it's something else entirely to be curious about why that's happening rather than merely blame them for being idiots and reacting like children. Another technique is called clean language. These are essentially verbal techniques that we can use to uncover the metaphors that people use so that we can better understand them, and of course that we can better understand ourselves. The idea of clean language is essentially to make the questions as open and free of assumptions as possible. And there's a long list of questions that you can learn to ask. One of the simplest ones that I've learned to ask is, what is the relationship between that and that? Stop talking and let them describe it. Or, when you're at your best, it's like what? Where you're inviting people to share the metaphor that is in their mind that helps them understand what's going on. And then there's something called a thinking partnership. A thinking partnership is a style of interaction between two people that's based on the idea, the old annoying consulting idea that the customer already knows what they need to do. They just need something like permission to do it. There's something that's blocking them from doing the obvious thing that you know they should do and they know they should do, but they're not doing. The thinking partnership takes that idea very seriously and says, well, oh, no, I thought that was next, but it's not. It takes that idea and says, if we give someone the space to think through what's going on for them, more often than not, they will actually come up with the solution themselves. So let's talk about motivation for a second. Why don't people just do the thing that is obviously a good idea that they should be doing, and they know they should be doing, and I know they should be doing, but they're not doing it? Like, say, test-driven development, just to pick an example. Well, it turns out that there are a bunch of different ways to think about this. There are two models that I found especially helpful over the last 20 years. One of them is by Dale Emery. He says that a person is likely to do something if they know how to get started, they can imagine what will happen when they do it, and they want those things to happen. And if one of those three things is missing, then the motivation to act will also be missing. So if you see somebody struggling to do something that even they admit is a good idea, this is a place to sort of debug their lack of motivation. And of course, it's a great way to start debugging your own lack of motivation. Another model which I've become aware of recently, I finally read Edward Dici's book, Why We Do What We Do, and he talks about the difference between autonomous and controlled motivation, the difference between, this actually came out of the initial research which talked about the difference between intrinsic motivation, motivation that comes from inside, and extrinsic motivation, motivation that comes from outside. You can imagine that autonomous and controlled is related to this intrinsic, extrinsic binary. And I highly recommend this as a way of understanding why the command and control structures in most enterprises lead to short-term compliance at best, and that if what you actually want is to cultivate a team where people are doing what they do for each other instead of just for themselves, trying to control them is simply not going to work. It feels like it should, and it never does. And so I recommend these as, if you're especially interested in this question, which is something that a lot of emerging leaders are really struggling with. It's one of the first serious problems they tend to struggle with is, why won't they listen to me? Why won't they do the thing that everybody knows is a good idea? This will help you get to the bottom of why that might be happening. Now, I talked a little bit about the difference between giving people advice and asking questions, and I want to drill into this a little bit because I noticed that there's a pattern that emerging leaders go through as they learn the value of asking questions in a leadership context. In the beginning, we give advice and we expect people to follow it. I am very smart. I have a bunch of experience. I have learned deeply about a thing. I am now going to teach you all about that thing. And then once you have the knowledge, you will clearly do it the way I do it, because of course that is what smart people do. That is what an expert is. And so in the beginning, we have a tendency to want to give advice and expect people to follow it. And then eventually, when we start to notice that they don't follow it, then we recognize that, well, maybe the best we can do is to give advice and hope people will follow it. And then eventually, we start to read books and hear from other leaders who tell us that asking questions is kind of a good idea. So when we start trying to ask questions, what we're doing is asking leading questions that are designed to manipulate people into thinking that our advice was their idea. It's well-meaning, but it's just a phase. And then eventually, we learn to ask leading questions that are designed to manipulate people into thinking more about their own problem, because we read in a book somewhere that people actually know how to solve their own problems. Now, what they probably need is your advice, but they don't want to take your advice because then they have to admit that they were dumb. So we have to manipulate them into choosing one of our solutions by asking them questions that are designed to make them think about their problem with full confidence that eventually they will choose one of our solutions because our solutions are very good. And then we lie down and the feeling will pass. And then we start to ask open questions which are designed to stimulate people's creativity, hoping that at some point they will choose a solution that's something like what we were probably going to suggest, because then they will continue to think of us as the expert who helped them. But because they think it was their idea, and in fact it actually was their idea, all we did was validate their idea, we get to feel like an expert, they get to feel ownership over the solution, everybody wins. But we can do better. This is the part that makes a lot of people feel concerned, but is in fact one of those areas in which vulnerability is a source of strength, not weakness. When you start to reach the point where you are genuinely asking open questions, not because you have any particular solution in mind, you might not even know how to solve their problem, that you are genuinely now a partner in helping them find the solutions to their problems, and you actually let them have the idea. You let the solution be theirs because there is no need any longer for you to feel like the expert. And then there's this annoying super coach phase where we're having genuine open conversations with people and we're refusing on principle to offer them advice because you read in a book that giving them advice is treating them like children and you want to treat them like adults. So you do that for a while. And then eventually you get to the point where you just say, hey, Most of the time, I like to guide people to think about what's going on. Most of them, I like to guide them to choose their own solutions. But sometimes the answer is so obvious that it would be silly to go through all that. So I'm just going to say, if I were in your shoes, I would do this. Hey, now tell me the 37 reasons why this isn't going to work. And that might be the beginning of a conversation that allows them to choose their own solutions, where you don't even care where the good ideas came from. Once again, all paths lead to Buddhism. So for the thinking partnership, it's really simple. You could read Nancy Kline's Time to Think. There are two key ingredients. One of them is exquisite attention, where we don't just have a conversation, but we have a conversation where I'm showing you ridiculous eye contact, and I'm really deeply paying attention to what you're saying because I have no interest in giving you advice. There is no reason for me to stop or to wait for my turn to speak because I'm genuinely not interested in speaking. My whole goal is just to let you say whatever you need to say so that you can get it out because you are organizing your own thoughts. And if I give you exquisite attention, not only will you take the space to talk, but eventually you'll get increasingly relaxed, which will allow you to become increasingly creative, increasingly vulnerable, and then eventually I do the other thing, which is what the consultant needs to get paid for, that's why it's TM, where you ask the incisive question. At some key moment, you ask a question such as, well, if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you do? That silence is an important part of it. And you let them, after 45 seconds or sometimes 5 minutes, say, well, if I knew I couldn't fail, I would just blah, 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 blah. And then you don't need to say more. The mere fact that they've said it to another human being who didn't laugh at them, who didn't look at them as though they were stupid, is enough for them to realize that, in fact, maybe they can do it. Now, it's hard to have time and energy to play well with others when you're struggling to get your own stuff together. So that's where some of these other tools are helpful, such as getting things done. A lot of people think that getting things done is about to-do lists. It is in the beginning, but then eventually you have this epiphany about your capacity to do work. The easiest way to do this is to do this simple exercise. Make a list of all the projects you think you want to work on in your life. They can be work projects, job projects, fun projects, family projects, it doesn't matter. All the things that you need to do because, for example, somebody needs to, renovate the kitchen, and the things that you want to do. And then give a very rough estimate about how long you'll need to do those things. I don't mean like how much time it will take, like your story points. I mean like, okay, well, I need like 4 months to do this, and 2 months to do that, and 3 years to do that. That'll take 10 years, and then add it all up. And what you'll notice is that the answer is somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 50 years. So you have 30 to 50 years of stuff you want to do. If you never have another good idea in your life, I'm sorry, you ain't going to do it. And that confronting your capacity, your limited capacity to do anything, is the key moment, in my opinion, where getting things done changes from being about deadlines and reminders and to-do lists to being about learning where you absolutely have to say no because you have no choice. The arithmetic is clear. You already have 50 years of things to do, and you're probably going to have another idea tomorrow, you idiot. After that, the to-do lists are actually pretty helpful. Another thing to focus on to work on is concentration. And this can be techniques like monotasking or Pomodoro technique. Thank you, Francesco. Because they help us learn how to work in short bursts and to handle interruptions better. And simple things like meditation and sleep. Yes, meditation and sleep are probably essential for most people most of the time to get their own work habits under control. Concentration is about directing your attention. Focus is about how narrow the beam is. So concentration is about directness, and focus is about breadth or width. And when getting things done starts to really kick in, then what you notice is that getting into a state of deep focus is easier than it used to be, and it becomes addictive. When you actually focus on one thing at a time and do it until it's done, the very next thing you want to do is do it again. It's one of the most amazing things you can do for getting your own personal habits under control. And then the last thing on this list here is right responsibility. Part of the idea from getting things done is not merely to have checklists so that urgent things don't surprise you and things don't slip through the cracks, but so that you figure out what are the things that you actually, not the things that you want to do, what are the things that you will actually do and then actually do them. Not the things that you want to do, but always seems, I was a musician when I was younger. I still have an electronic organ in my living room. I haven't played it in 5 years. At some point, I have to admit that I'm simply never going to do it again. That's okay. The important thing is to make the distinction between people have this idea in their mind that what they need is to only do the things they want to do. Then they will feel happier. No, your life gets better when you focus on the things that you will actually do. And gradually over time, more of those will be the things you want to do. And so when you focus on these personal habits, here are the benefits you get. This is part of being selfish so that you can then give to others. Just want to check where I am on the list here. I am going to go over time, and if anybody really wants to leave in the next 4 minutes and 15 seconds, you aren't going to hurt my feelings. I get paid the same. If you really are struggling to let go, to learn how to say no to things, to let go of the things that you wish you could do but aren't actually going to do, here's a thought experiment that really works. Contract hepatitis. Not really, but imagine that you did. Imagine that you now have 1% of your normal energy. What changes in your life? What changes would you have to make in your life to live with this new reality? I was diagnosed 3 years ago with atrial fibrillation. It's not a life-threatening heart condition, but it is the kind of thing that forces me to be on medication for the rest of my life. And I learned that I needed to be on blood thinners because I had not a stroke and not the thing that's like a stroke, but the thing that's like the thing that's like a stroke. It lasted 45 seconds. It scared me half to death. And I realized, I guess this is how we find out that I need to be on blood thinners for the rest of my life? The answer is apparently yes. Any of these things will do. Any of these kinds of new realities can stand in for contracting hepatitis so that you can answer the question, if I had now a severe limit to what I could do, what would I stop doing? What would I delegate to other people? What would I simply let fall to the floor? What are the things that really, truly matter in life? And once you figure out what's on that list, then maybe those should be the projects that go to the top of your list in getting things done. For me, I had an existential crisis in a hotel in Vilnius, Lithuania in October 2010. And when my wife, who was traveling with me at the time, asked me, well, what would you like to do? A question nobody had asked me before. I said, well, I want to go bowling. She said, well, unfortunately, we're on this tour until June. And it was October. So we're on this tour until June. You can't go bowling now because there are no 5-pin bowling centers in Eastern Europe. But I promise you, the first thing we do after we get home is you're going to walk into the bowling center and bowl. And this is sometimes what it takes for us. You don't have to wait for an existential crisis or a psychotic break or a severe depression episode that lands you in a hospital if you could imagine it happening by imagining what would I have to do if, for example, I contracted hepatitis. This is literally called hepatitis leave. It's a thought experiment that Ricardo Semler describes, I believe, in the book, The 7-Day Weekend. So, we've been talking a lot about helping yourself. The idea here is to use these ideas to build excess time, excess money, and excess energy that you can first use to rest and recover and then reinvest in building a team around you. And let me tell you, this is not easy. It's simple, but not easy. And there were lots of times where I was terrified that I was going to have to go back on commitments that I had made the week before, that I was terrified that people were not going to like me. I was terrified that people were going to hate me, that they were going to stop hiring me, that they were going to call me a fraud. But the bottom line is I had 30 to 50 years of stuff to do, and I was probably going to have more good ideas, so I needed to say no to something. And I just started by saying no in the areas where I felt the safest to say no. And then as I did that more, I built up more confidence that I could use, more optimism, more hope that I could use to say no in other contexts. And I just kept letting that compound and compound and compound. And eventually it got less scary. I promise you the only other alternative is a hospital stay for depression. I don't recommend it. And this is the phrase that pays. I know I'm out of time, but I'm going to take the time to go through this because it's fun. The phrase that pays is, I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that. If you can learn to deliver this phrase, I don't know how well it works in Greek, but in English, if you can deliver it with just calm tone, I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that. It's amazing because they can't argue with you. Here's what happens when they try. So, someone asks you to do something impossible, and you say, I'm sorry, but I don't know how to do that. I don't think, So maybe we're dealing with an American, and they have the can-do spirit, so they say, I believe in you, chief, you can do it, go get him. No, I'm sorry. All right, this person has got an unrealistic picture of what's going on, they're not listening to me yet, let's try again. No, I'm sorry, I really don't know how to do that. I don't know how to finish that feature by July. Well, it's fine, really. I believe in you. You're a smart guy. You're going to figure it out. Go get him. Look, I don't think you're hearing me. I'm sorry, but I don't know how to do that. And now we get real. You don't seem to understand it. I have a 1.7 million euro deal riding on this. You need to have that feature done by July. I am not joking around here. Let's go. When that happens, I have learned, and I don't actually remember where I picked this up. I think I might have just said it out of frustration one day. As soon as they start yelling at me like I don't seem to understand how important or urgent or critical this is for them, then I look right back at them and say, I need you to speak Estonian by Thursday. Now, it really helps that they don't already know how to speak Estonian. Pick a different language if you need to, a difficult one. Hungarian works well. That's a good alternative. I need you to speak Estonian by Thursday. And then shut up. Because, of course, they're not going to know what happened, right? So you let like 30 seconds pass, and then you say, no, I don't think you get it. I need you to speak Estonian by Thursday. I have a 1.2 million euro project that's going to be on the line here if you're not able to speak Estonian by Thursday. And like play the role, get angry. And what you want is to push them to say the magic phrase. No matter what you say, no matter how much you yell, no matter what you threaten me with, there is absolutely no goddamn way I'm going to speak Estonian by Thursday. And then you say, great. Now can we please have an adult conversation about what to do next? Now, I've only had to use this 3 times in my career, and I was fired only once, so you can do the arithmetic from there. But these are expressions of what tends to happen in that situation is that the person who is being asked to do the impossible thing feels pressure to say yes, so they do it even though they can't. And what they're doing is becoming over-responsible. So this is a term from the responsibility virus. You could also use Chris Avery's responsibility process model, which talks about, I believe, 7 different stages of sort of the path towards taking genuine responsibility for the things that you can control and not for the things that you can't. One of the things that we learn with these techniques is when it's perfectly reasonable for you to refuse the responsibility that someone else is trying to force onto you. This is something that especially programmers are very bad at because they have built their entire career around being faster than everybody, smarter than everybody, and delivering things. And when they finally reach the point where they can't anymore, they act like the Indian hotel staff and they say yes, even though everyone in the room knows the answer is no. But they'll hate me. They might. You can't control that. So here are some tools that can help. Loving kindness meditation. Start by directing it to yourself, wishing yourself well. May I be well, may I be happy, may I be safe, may I be free from suffering. And just repeat this for 10, 20, 30, 60, 90 minutes, whatever you need. Eventually, you'll start to practice loving kindness meditation for someone who is a pain in your ass. And there's a saying in meditation that 1 hour of metta meditation for a troublesome person is worth 100 hours of any other kind of meditation. Trust me, it works. Or you can borrow from the Stoics, that I can only control my reactions. Or you can focus on responsibility. I'm not responsible for their feelings. They are responsible for their feelings. Now, that doesn't mean be an asshole. It means that you can try to make someone feel safe, but you can't make them feel safe. You can try to cultivate the environment in which they should feel safe. You're making some guesses about how to do that, but their feelings are their responsibility. At some point, they need to look inside themselves and make some changes. And this is a phrase, I don't know how well this works in other languages, but in English, a lot of English speakers don't make the distinction between I don't care and I don't mind, but I find this distinction critical. I like to say I care, but I don't mind. I care means I'm deeply interested in the outcome. I don't mind means I'm willing to accept whatever happens. And one of the hardest things for people to learn is that it's okay to accept things not going the way you want them to and still want to try to improve things. When you can learn to accept things the way they are and not give in, not give up, but keep trying to improve things, I think you might notice, as I did, that your life gets a whole lot better. So, I apologize for going long, but we have come to the end. So here's the summary. The idea of the selfish team player is to become a more effective leader by taking 3 key steps. First, recover, then consolidate, then serve others. Get your own house in order, rest and recover. Then, figure out what resources do you have available that you didn't used to have. You have more time, you have more money, you have more energy, you have more compassion, you have more empathy, you have more context, you have more skill, you have more knowledge, you have more interest. And then, give these things to the people around you with the joy of an 8-year-old child, where you're giving those as free gifts and not doing it because you feel pressured. Help yourself so that you can help others. Here's where you can find me. And now, I know that I am standing right now between the speakers and beer. But I don't drink beer unless it's in Germany or the Czech Republic. So, I am willing to answer questions on stage until people have decided that they have had enough. What are the 37 reasons why this is not going to work for you? What is the thing that's in your head that you don't want to say in public? If you need to say it to me in private, we can certainly do that. I'm happy to do that. Is there something where you're not sure how to get started? Is there something where you're not sure what will happen when you try? Or have we all just decided that I've gone way too far over time and we just want to get the hell out of here? Okay. Then I guess it's over. Thanks very much for your time and attention.